I am Joyce Connelly, Museum Specialist, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to highlight some of the accomplishments, benefits, and consequences of mass digitization projects at Smithsonian Gardens. Smithsonian Gardens, or SG, is known for maintaining all of the many gardens and landscapes around the Smithsonian Museums in Washington, D.C., but it also manages three very different types of collections: archival, living, and museum. Each of these collection types provides us with an incredible range of digitization opportunities. Starting out with some of our accomplishments, we've made great headway digitizing significant portions from all three collections, with their digital surrogates and catalog records now available online through a number of Smithsonian search portals. A number of considerations drive our digitization priorities, including copyright status, potential usage, a collection's processing and cataloging status, and how uniform the collection format is. Smithsonian Gardens' first mass digitization project dates back to 2013. It was used by the Smithsonian's Digitization Program Office as a case study to show the workflow for a successful rapid capture project, from capture to post-processing to ingest into the Smithsonian's digital asset management system. After we saw how incredibly efficient this workflow was, we never wanted to go back to scanning on a flatbed scanner. Since then, Smithsonian Gardens has completed several large and small-scale digitization projects, generating both digital surrogates and corresponding catalog records for online searching. While there's an extensive amount of prep and finishing work that goes into each of these digitization projects, the benefits they bring about are all well worth the effort, including ready access to collections online and enhanced engagement with online audiences. This was particularly helpful for us during the height of the pandemic, when staff were not able to get into the office to answer reference requests. Thanks to being available online, Smithsonian Gardens content has attracted local, national, and international audiences. This reach has broadened the use of the collections well beyond our expected garden and plant audiences. We never know how or by whom they'll be used. This particular image, for example, was used by the Smithsonian and the Library of Congress in a joint announcement that they posted last year. One outlet that Smithsonian Gardens has had great success with is the Smithsonian Transcription Center, where virtual volunteers have transcribed thousands of pages for us, including letters, garden journals and diaries, and garden lecture scripts. One of the most impactful transcription projects for us involved hundreds of contest letters sent to the Burpee Seed Company in the 1920s that provide invaluable insight into everyday gardeners from that time. Smithsonian Gardens has been lucky enough to join in a number of collaborative digitization projects, including a recent one funded by the Smithsonian's American Women's History Initiative. Being ready and willing to take advantage of these opportunities has been a lifeline for Smithsonian Gardens in terms of extending our digital reach. While Smithsonian Gardens' social media accounts focus primarily on the many gardens and landscapes at the Smithsonian, the SG collections provide important and engaging digital content and often fill in the blanks when particular topics like Heritage Months are highlighted. We've been creative in finding ways to proactively engage online audiences with our digital content. Our Mystery Gardens project, for example, asked the public to help identify unknown gardens in the archives. We've had scores of IDs come in this way, which has added significant informational value to these images. Digital content from the Smithsonian Gardens collections has also been used to develop topical-based resources for educators and students in the Smithsonian Learning Lab. SG used entries from a Gardner's journal in Learning Lab to highlight some of the now historical happenings that she commented upon. It helps to think as creatively as possible to find outlets like this one for our digital content. Smithsonian Gardens took advantage of an online exhibition opportunity to have one of its garden journals digitized, which in turn was posted on the Transcription Center. This was a case of reaching entirely different audiences by repurposing the same digital content. A digitization project that has had a huge impact for Smithsonian Gardens was photographing nearly 1,400 historic garden furnishings and horticultural artifacts in storage. Without images and catalog records for these pieces available online, they would continue to remain hidden to the public. Hundreds of posy holders from the horticultural artifacts collection, as well as a handful of other Smithsonian Gardens collections, have been added to the Smithsonian's open access portal, where they can be used by anyone for any purpose without having to secure permission. We had to carefully consider all of the ramifications, particularly copyright status, before making the decision to add these collections to open access. But it has since become another powerful tool in our digital arsenal. It's taken us a while, but with a lot of help from OCIO, Smithsonian Gardens recently launched a portal on its own website for the Smithsonian Gardens collections. With this resource, we've been able to curate some of our most popular collection holdings into canned searches for quick online access. I'll end by enumerating some of the consequences, or perhaps more accurately, some of the challenges that Smithsonian Gardens' many digitization projects have brought about. Namely, our digitization priorities keep evolving as new collections are acquired. There's always a digitization backlog to address. It's a challenge finding resources to ensure that cataloging is also part of the digitization process. In most cases, we've had to sacrifice item-level descriptions for photographic images, as was standard for us in the past, in order to keep up with the volume. And living collections, just by their very nature, often need to be redigitized in order to document their growth or decline. There's also the challenging of capturing meaningful online user statistics that might help us better prioritize our digitization efforts in the future. Finally, I want to thank our many supporters and collaborators who have enabled Smithsonian Gardens to make such progress on its digitization efforts, particularly OCIO, the National Collections Program, and the Digitization Program Office. Without help from these units, we absolutely wouldn't be able to accomplish what we're doing digitization-wise without them. I'll leave you with a quote from Smithsonian Secretary Baird that is as true today as it was 170 years ago, that the Smithsonian's value is tied directly to the resources and knowledge that it sends out into the world. Digitization efforts at the Smithsonian undoubtedly help in this regard. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'm Joyce Connelly, museum specialist with Smithsonian Gardens, and I want to introduce my colleague, Kelly Crawford. She is also a museum specialist with Smithsonian Gardens. And Kelly, if you would, I did not say much about the Archives of American Gardens, which represents the bulk of the digitization that Smithsonian Gardens has done. So if you wouldn't mind saying a little bit about AAG and maybe the formats that we've digitized.
Sure. So the Archives of American Gardens is a repository for images and documentation on over 10,000 historic and contemporary gardens. And as Joyce mentioned in her presentation, we've digitized a number of collections But within the archives, we've digitized stereographs, glass lantern slides, film negatives, transparencies, some correspondence, a scrapbook, and even a garden journal. Let's see. Can you talk a little bit about what goes into prepping an archival collection for digitization?
There's a lot of prep work. First and foremost, it's inventorying the collection that's going to be digitized. And for me, that was putting eyes on everything, not even just at the box level, but to open the box, make sure that everything's where it says it is. And also to identify any of the anomalies that are going to slow up the digitization process. So they might have to be set aside to be digitized at the very end. But we've also found with slide collections, you want to make sure that the emulsion is all facing one way. And when you're working with the contractor, if you are working with the digitization contractor, to make sure that they're catching the right side of any transparency, so that they know what which side is the emulsion and which side is not. And can you give us some additional details about the Mystery Gardens project and how well it was received? I wonder, I'll pitch that to you, Kelly. Do you want to talk about the Mystery Gardens and how it was on the virtual volunteers site? Right, so Smithsonian had listed our Mystery Gardens project, which we've had for a number of years. Staff pinpointed hundreds of unidentified gardens, and we created a web page inviting anyone to identify them for us. And it became particularly popular during the pandemic. We received many inquiries, which was really wonderful, from organizations, even fraternities, people that were looking to fulfill their volunteer hours. We did still, obviously with any identification that came in to our resource account, we would have to check the accuracy of any IDs. And we do have a wonderful volunteer on staff who helps us do much of that work. And we have a question, what software do you use? Capture One Cultural Heritage. I believe the software that was used was, well, the camera that was used was Phase One, I think a 80 pixel camera. And I believe it's the Phase One software that was used. But all of the images that were taken of the museum objects or archival images or orchids were, converted to TIFFs from the EIP files. And can you talk a little bit about the Smithsonian Transcription Center and how it's added value to the collections? Joyce? I would say that probably the biggest impact the Transcription Center had was filling a collecting gap that we had in the collections. The Burpee letters from the 20s, we found out that they dealt with the everyday gardener, and whereas much of the lantern slides in the collection we have more geared to middle class and upper middle class gardens. So the everyday gardener, learning more about those people through these transcriptions was incredibly helpful. And also, we never know how the collections are going to be used once they've been digitized. We had a student, I think it was 20th century women's rhetoric, contact us about the Burpee letters. So that was a case where it came out of left field that we absolutely had no sense of how the letters would be used. But it's very gratifying to know that they're being used for purposes that we didn't even anticipate.
All right. And how have interns contributed to Smithsonian Garden's digitization projects? I can take that. We've had some wonderful interns, and actually most recently during the pandemic, virtual interns, which has worked out really well. But all of them have at some point verified the transcriptions that are in the transcription center. They have also done some really interesting data visualizations using some of the contest letters and where they were from. And we posted some of that on the Smithsonian Collection Center blog. They've also obviously added a lot of new data to our catalog records, which is a never-ending task. And then obviously, we've utilized social media quite a bit to sort of extend our reach and make our collections sort of more widely known, more available, just beyond, sort of our scholarly audience that is more traditional for us. And do you have any lessons learned when it comes to digitizing an archival collection?
I would say one of the lessons I learned was, if you have the opportunity and the collection warrants it for an archival photography collection, you might consider culling images. These are, particularly if it's a professional photographer that bracketed their shots quite a bit, you have to determine whether each and every image is an artifact to be saved or whether it's more for the informational value of those images. So in a couple of collections that we had, we significantly cut down on the number of images that needed to be digitized. So that was well worth the effort. But that said, you need to know the collection very well to be able to make that decision. There are some collections where the images are mediocre, but every one of them has informational value. So you wouldn't cull collections from that. But I think that you get as much prep time as you can for these projects, because something or other is going to come into play where you're going to have to troubleshoot. So, but again, and as I mentioned before, I think inventory is critical. It's an opportunity if things are out on loans or at a curator's desk or something, that you want to make sure that everything is on hand. And then communicating closely with the contractor. We have dealt primarily with contractors for our digitization projects. So even something as simple as with the artifacts that were digitized, what was the field we wanted around that image in terms of how closely it should be cropped. So that's being closely involved right from the get-go. And especially when if a contractor if you're working with a contractor, to stay in close contact with them at the very beginning, just to know that everyone is on the same page with the details, and not make any assumptions. I mentioned emulsion. Some photographers might not know that is a concern with slide collections or transparency. So that, again, you can't assume anything.
Okay, and here's another question. How has the digitization expanded the use of Acai Garden's collections?
Do you want to start out with that?
I mean, certainly our use numbers have gone way up. since we've provided more collections online. I will say, though, that we've been digitizing and making collections available since the early 1990s. We digitized to video disc, and at the time, those image resolutions were fine for computers at that time, but for the last decade, we've gone back and redigitized those collections, and because so many of those early images were pixelated. And I know that there were many researchers that came to us thinking thinking that those older images were what the images looked like, but we've been able to provide much better resolution images online, and it has definitely increased the use in all sorts of manners. I feel like we've gotten far more research requests than we ever have, and our use statistics have gone very high. I think we get about 3,000 downloads for our images in the catalog, and that's not including right clicks on the images. I mean, there's so much that we don't know about the use, and that's really an area that we would love more information about. And I know that that's coming, but do you have anything to add, Joyce?
Our colleague, Sarah Hadeen, who is the Living Collections Manager at Smithsonian Garden, she is not online today, but I will say there's a whole host of considerations with living collections to consider, and especially with the living plant collections, whether the plants are going to be in peak bloom when they were being digitized. So that was quite a bit of musical chairs in terms of prepping or staging the plants that would be ready for digitization. And then you've also got the size considerations. So once the camera was set up, it was geared toward capturing a certain size range. So again, there are a whole lot of moving parts with any digitization project. And we've had incredible help from the Digitization Program Office at the Smithsonian to help with our workflows and make sure that things are hammered out ahead of time.
All right. As an early pilot for mass digitization projects, what changes to workflow have you seen since the first project to current projects?
I will say that having a contractor on site was a luxury. We had the most fragile collection, glass plate negative collection from the early 20th century. So not having to pack those up and send them out to to deliver them to the contractor was most helpful. But we're finding now that just the scale of the collections warrant them being sent to the contractor to be digitized and then returned to us. So there are considerations with handling with that, obviously. But I would say that it was learning what we were capable of, what was capable of being accomplished in a mass digitization project with the case study. But after that, it's been just finding funding for digitization projects. And also, Kelly, if you might want to talk about cataloging, how that has changed in with the scale of digitization.
Yeah, so that first pilot project that we did with DPO, we had the luxury of having every single glass plate negative item level cataloged. That's something that is probably not typical for many of the collections that we are now digitizing. We obviously always want to have some kind of description available before we digitize and have the collection fully processed. But the sheer volume that we are digitizing it is not possible to do item level cataloging. So we have really changed our cataloging workflow to, provide access points to sort of almost slideshows of images instead of item by item. This is something that's very different from how we used to do things, but digitization, the scale of digitization just we're digitizing so many things, we just can't keep up with the cataloging, but we certainly have emphasized that we need cataloging support after digitization so that we can try to create access points to make all of that digitized material available. And we've got another question from a preservation standpoint. Do you save the negative and the positive if shooting film?
We've been lucky that our collections are pretty much the one image. There are no sort of duplicative iterations of those images. So it's the one glass lantern slide, it's the one glass plate negative, it's the one film negative, the one transparency. So we haven't had to deal with that.
All right.
Kelly, do you want to say a little about maybe open access and what the consideration was to put the stereograph collection on there and the bouquet holders?
Sure. So Joyce and I, we looked across all of our collections, and in particular, the archives and the artifact collections, and identified museum objects that did not have any kind of copyright or licensing constraints. So we were part of the second wave of open access for the artifacts, and many of those high resolution images are available now to anybody who wants to use them. We have also identified an archival collection that it could be completely open access. Right now, the software that we use is not currently set up to deliver those, but that will be part of that wave whenever we start to allow archival collections to become part of the open access pool. And it looks like we just have about 2 more minutes left. And
I might call that time, but I want to thank everyone for attending and learning more about Smithsonian Gardens and the collections that we've digitized. Thank you.
Thank you.